One life changed eternity. Welcome to Justice and Glory. Together.
The picture in your mind. Close your eyes and picture the place where Jesus was crucified. If you grew up anywhere near a church or ever walked through a museum of European painting, the image is already there before you ask for it. A lonely green hill rising above the city. 3 tall crosses, stark against a bruised and stormy sky. A small crowd huddled at the base while lightning gathers on the horizon. It is one of the most reproduced scenes in the history of art. And almost none of it comes from the Gospels. The Gospel writers give us a name, a direction, and a handful of spare details, and then they fall silent. They never describe a mountain. They never mention a storm at the moment of death. They never tell us the hill was green, or tall, or set dramatically apart. What they hand down instead is stranger, and in a way, far more unsettling than the painting. So, here's the question that has occupied historians, archaeologists, and pilgrims for the better part of 2,000 years. Where was Golgotha, really? What did it actually look like? And after all these centuries, can anyone still find it? Hold that question, because the answer takes us into the streets of a first-century city, into a working stone quarry, and into one of the longest-running disputes in the archaeology of the Holy Land. The name no one translates. Start with the name itself, because the name is the first clue that the familiar picture has gone wrong. We call the place Calvary, and Calvary sounds like the name of a hill, but Calvary is not the original word. It is Latin. When Jerome translated the Gospels into Latin centuries later, he rendered the term with the Latin word for skull, Calvaria, and from Calvaria we eventually got Calvary. Strip that away and go back to what the Gospel writers actually wrote. And the word underneath is not Latin at all. It is Aramaic, Golgotha, and Golgotha does not mean hill, or mountain, or height. It means the skull. Listen to how carefully the 4 accounts handle it. Matthew tells us they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. Mark gives almost the same words, the place Golgotha, translated as the place of a skull. John records that Jesus went out to the place called the place of a skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha, and Luke, alone among the 4, drops the Aramaic name entirely and reaches only for the Greek. He calls it simply the place called the skull. 4 writers, 3 languages between them, and every one of them stops to make sure you understand one thing. This was the place of the skull. None of them says why, and that silence is where the mystery begins. What Rome actually did. Before we can find Golgotha, we have to unlearn the mountain, and to unlearn the mountain we have to understand what the Romans were actually doing when they crucified a man. Crucifixion was not a private execution carried out in some remote and mournful spot. It was the opposite. It was theater. It was a message written in human suffering, and the whole point of the message was that people had to see it. The Romans chose their execution sites the way a company today chooses a billboard next to the busiest roads, at the gates of the city, where the maximum number of travelers and traders and pilgrims would pass by and take the warning home. A crucifixion hidden on a distant hill would have failed at the one thing it was designed to do. The Gospels quietly confirm this, if you know to look. Matthew and Mark both record that people passing by hurled insults at Jesus as he hung there, passing by. That single phrase tells you the cross stood within sight and earshot of a road, close enough for ordinary foot traffic to slow down, read the charge nailed above his head, and mock. This was not a peak. This was a roadside, and we are not only reasoning from texts here. In 1968, on a construction site in a northern suburb of Jerusalem called Givat HaMivtar, workers accidentally broke into a first-century tomb. Inside, among the stone bone boxes that Jewish families used in that era, the archaeologist Vasilios Tsaferis found something that had never been recovered before. A human heel bone with an iron nail, about 11.5 centimeters long, still driven straight through it. Fragments of olive wood still clung to the metal. The nail had struck a knot in the wood and bent, which is very likely why it could never be pulled free. and why it survives to this day. The man's name was scratched onto the ossuary, Yehohanan. For all the tens of thousands of people the Romans are known to have crucified, his bones remain even now the only unambiguous physical trace of a crucifixion ever found. And that scarcity itself tells a grim story, because most victims were never given a proper burial at all. That Yehohanan was, that his family reclaimed him and laid his bones in a family tomb, quietly matters when we come to the burial of Jesus. So set the painting aside. The historical Golgotha was not a solitary summit. It was a public place, beside a road, at the edge of a city, chosen precisely so that everyone walking past could see a man die. Outside the gate, now we can start narrowing down where, and the Gospels, spare as they are, give us 4 constraints that any real candidate has to satisfy. The first is that it lay outside the city. The letter to the Hebrews states it directly, that Jesus suffered outside the gate, and draws a whole meditation out of that fact. This fits everything we know about the period. Jewish law and custom did not permit burials or executions of this kind inside the walls of Jerusalem. The dead and the dying belonged outside. The second constraint is that it was near the city, not off in the wilderness. John records that the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. Close enough that the sign fixed above the cross, John tells us, could be read by many, and was written in 3 languages for the crowds streaming past. The third constraint is the road which we have already met. Passers-by, a thoroughfare. And the fourth is the most specific of all, and it comes only from John. He writes that in the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid, and because the tomb was close and the Sabbath was pressing, they laid him there. A garden, a brand new unused tomb, cut for someone who had not yet needed it. Matthew adds the owner's name, Joseph of Arimathea, and tells us it was Joseph's own new tomb, sealed with a great stone rolled across the entrance. Put those 4 together, and a picture forms that is nothing like the storm-lashed mountain. A place just outside a city gate, beside a well-traveled road, on the edge of a garden, with freshly cut tombs in the rock nearby. Now the only question is whether any spot in Jerusalem actually matches, and here the ground itself begins to speak, the city that kept moving its walls. There is a complication we have to face, honestly, because it is the single objection you will hear most often. The traditional site, the great church in the heart of the old city, sits today inside the walls. And if Golgotha had to be outside the walls, that seems at first to disqualify it completely. The answer is that the walls of Jerusalem did not stay still. This is one of the most important facts in the whole investigation, and it is the one most often forgotten. The city expanded. In the 1st century, a boundary known to scholars as the Second Wall marked the northern edge of Jerusalem, and the historian Josephus, writing a generation later, describes the lines of the city's walls and the gates set into them. Among the gates he names is one called the Gennath Gate, the Garden Gate, and near it, we know from excavation, lay an old stone quarry. Then, roughly a decade after the crucifixion, the ruler Herod Agrippa began a 3rd wall further out, and the city swelled to enclose ground that had been open country when Jesus died. The wall you see around the old city today is later still, so a place that stands inside the walls now could very well have stood outside the walls then. To ask whether the site was inside or outside the city, you cannot use a modern map. You have to rebuild the map of the year 30, and when archaeologists do that, the picture shifts dramatically under the pagan temple, which brings us to the first of our 2 candidates, and to a story that begins 3 centuries after the crucifixion, in the year 326, according to Christian tradition. The Empress Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine, came to Jerusalem searching for the holy sites. The local Christians led her to a spot, and it was, on the face of it, an absurd choice. The place they pointed to was not empty and reverent. It was buried under a pagan temple, Some 2 centuries earlier, after crushing a Jewish revolt and rebuilding Jerusalem as a Roman city, the Emperor Hadrian had raised a temple over the site, dedicated, our earliest source says, to the goddess Venus. Constantine ordered the temple torn down and the earth beneath it cleared away. And according to Eusebius, the bishop and historian who was alive at the time and who wrote the account we still rely on, when the fill was removed, a rock-cut tomb came to light beneath it. The Bishop of Jerusalem identified it as the tomb of Jesus. Over it, Constantine built an enormous church, and the church, rebuilt and rebuilt again across the centuries, still stands. We call it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now on its own, a 4th century tradition is not proof. People can misremember, and 300 years is a long time. But here is the detail that makes serious historians pause. Consider how strange a choice this was. By Helena's day, the site was inside the city walls, covered by a functioning Roman temple in the middle of a living city. If you were simply inventing a holy site to impress an empress, you would not choose the most inconvenient, least plausible, most built-over spot imaginable. You would choose a quiet hill outside the gates that look the part. The very awkwardness of the location, the fact that later Christians had to demolish a pagan temple to reach it, suggests they were not choosing freely. They were pointing to a place they believed had been remembered. What the spade found. And then, in the 20th century, the spade caught up with the tradition. Excavations in and around the church, work associated with archaeologists such as Kathleen Kenyon and Virgilio Corbo, and confirmed again by Italian teams in recent years, revealed the buried history of the ground. Long before it was a church and long before it was a temple, this place had been a limestone quarry, worked in the centuries before Christ. By the 1st century before Christ, the quarry had gone out of use, and its scarred and uneven floor had been filled with soil and turned to a different purpose. It became a garden, an orchard, with fig and carob and olive, and along its edges, cut into the old quarry faces, it became a burial ground. Tombs of exactly the right period, the 1st century, have been found within the complex, and the tomb, venerated as Jesus's own, was originally of a recognized 1st century type. Read that back against John's 4 constraints. Outside the 1st century walls, a quarry turned garden, fresh tombs cut into the rock, a garden with a new tomb in the place of the skull. The convergence is striking, and it is why the majority of scholars who study the question regard the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as the more historically credible of the 2 sites. But notice, and this matters enormously, exactly what the archaeology has shown and what it has not. It has confirmed that the setting is real. A genuine 1st century quarry, garden, and cemetery standing outside the walls of Jesus' Jerusalem is not a legend. What no excavation can do, what no spade will ever do, is prove that one particular tomb among them held one particular man. The stones confirm the world. They cannot, by themselves, confirm the event. Keep that line clear, because it is the honest edge of this entire subject, the other hill. But there is a second candidate, and to leave it out would be to tell only half the story. It is the site most beloved by many Protestant, evangelical, and Latter-day Saint pilgrims, and it has a very different character. Its modern history begins in the 19th century. A German scholar named Otto Thenius suggested as early as 1842 that a rocky hill north of the Damascus Gate might be the true Golgotha, and others took up the idea. But the man whose name stuck to it was a British general, Charles Gordon, who visited Jerusalem in the early 1880s. Standing before a low cliff a few hundred feet outside the Damascus Gate, Gordon saw something that seized him. In the face of the rock were 2 sunken cavities, like the empty eye sockets of a skull, with a ridge between them like the bridge of a nose. A skull in the very rock, the place of the skull. Nearby stood a quiet rock-cut tomb, discovered a few years earlier by a farmer digging a cistern, set in a peaceful garden with an ancient wine press and a great water cistern, the kind of place that could once have belonged to a wealthy man. Along the ground outside the tomb, ran a groove that looked for all the world like the track for a great rolling stone. To Gordon, and to the many who followed him, everything fit. Here was a skull-shaped hill outside the gate, beside a garden with a rolling stone tomb. It felt right in a way the crowded, incense-filled, endlessly contested church in the old city did not. In 1894, an association was formed to care for it, and it has been a place of Protestant prayer and reflection ever since. It is called the Garden Tomb, and it is genuinely moving to stand there. But when the same archaeological scrutiny that supported the Holy Sepulchre was turned on the Garden Tomb, the evidence did not hold. 600 years too old. In 1986, the Israeli archaeologist Gabriel Barkay published a careful study of the Garden Tomb, and his conclusion was decisive. The tomb was not carved in the time of Jesus at all. Its architecture, the shape of its chambers, the triple bench cut along its walls, the low doorway, belongs unmistakably to an earlier age, the Iron Age, the period of the First Temple, roughly the 8th or 7th century before Christ. The tombs on the property of the nearby Church of St. Stephen are of the same family, and no tombs of the right 1st century type have been found around the Garden Tomb at all. Follow what that means. The Gospels are emphatic on one point about the burial. John says the tomb was new, one in which no one had ever yet been laid. Matthew calls it Joseph's own new tomb, a tomb cut fresh, unused, for a man still living. But the Garden Tomb, if Barkay is right, was already some 600 years old by the time of the crucifixion. It was not new. It had been standing since the days of the kings of Judah. It cannot be the tomb the Gospels describe. And that famous groove, the one that looked like a rolling stone track, Barkay identified it not as a 1st century feature at all, but as a water trough cut in the Crusader period, more than 1,000 years after Jesus, when the site was used as a stable. The cistern beside it carries medieval waterproofing. The features that made the site feel so biblical turned out one by one to belong to other centuries. This is why the honest position, and the position held by essentially all critical scholars today, is that the Garden Tomb, however beautiful and however conducive to prayer, is almost certainly not the place. Even the association that lovingly maintains it does not claim otherwise. They present it in their own words as a visual aid to faith, a place that helps a visitor imagine the world of the Gospels, and not as the proven tomb of Christ. And there is real wisdom in that humility. Why a skull? We still have not answered the oldest small question of all, the one the Gospel writers left hanging. Why the skull? Why was this place called Golgotha in the first place? And here we are firmly in the territory of tradition and inference, so let us be honest about which is which. 3 explanations have been offered across the centuries. The first is the simplest, that the place was named for its shape, a bald, rounded outcrop of rock that looked, from a distance, like the dome of a skull. It is worth noticing that all 4 Gospels reach for the Greek word cranion, the cranium, the top of the skull, not a word for a full face. That points, if anything, toward a rounded hump of stone, rather than the dramatic skull face of Gordon's cliff. And it quietly warns us that the very thing that convinced Gordon, a skull with eyes and a nose, may be reading the name backwards. The second explanation is grimmer, that it was named for what happened there, a known place of execution where death and perhaps the skulls of the dead were associated with the ground. And the third is the oldest recorded explanation and the most legendary. In the 3rd century, the Christian scholar Origen passed on a tradition that Golgotha was the burial place of the skull of Adam, the first man, so that the blood of the new Adam fell upon the bones of the old. Later writers repeated it, and to this day, in a chamber beneath the traditional Calvary, pilgrims are shown a spot tied to that story. It is a beautiful piece of theology. But it is a later tradition, not a fact of geography, and it should be held as exactly that. We do not know which is right. The Gospels simply do not say, and perhaps that unanswered why is itself a kind of fitting silence. The world, the stones confirm. So where does all of this leave us? Let us gather what we can actually stand on and separate it cleanly from what we cannot. What the evidence confirms is the world. It confirms that first-century Jerusalem was ringed by quarries and gardens and rock-cut tombs just outside its shifting walls. It confirms that one such quarry, turned to a garden and a cemetery, lay outside the city of Jesus' day, near a gate the sources actually call the Garden Gate, precisely where a place answering John's description would have to be. It confirms from a bent nail in a heel bone that Roman crucifixion in this city was real and brutal and exactly as public as the Gospels imply. This is not faith, this is archaeology, and it is remarkably consistent with the setting the Gospels sketch. What the evidence cannot do is set a pin in a map with certainty. It cannot prove that the rock beneath the great church, rather than some vanished outcrop nearby, was the exact stone where the crosses stood. The most it can say, and it says it strongly, is that if we are looking for the real Golgotha, the ground under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre fits the first century better than anywhere else proposed, while the serene garden tomb, for all its beauty, fits the wrong century entirely. Between certainty and legend, there is a large and honest middle ground, and that middle ground is where the real history lives. The picture corrected. Now go back to the painting you began with, the lonely green mountain, the three crosses on the storm-dark ridge, the distant, dignified isolation. Almost every part of it dissolves. Golgotha was not a mountain. The Gospels never called it one. It was low, close, and public. It was not remote. It sat just beyond a city gate, within sight and sound of a road busy enough that people slowed to jeer. It was not green and pastoral. It was the raw edge of an old stone quarry where the ground was scarred with cuttings and pocked with fresh graves, and where someone, in better days, had planted a garden among the rocks, and it was not private. That was the entire point. A man was nailed up in the most ordinary and most trafficked kind of place, at the threshold of the city, so that everyone coming and going would see and understand and be afraid. The letter to the Hebrews seizes on exactly this, that Jesus suffered outside the gate, in the unclean, exposed public ground beyond the wall, and finds in that geography the heart of its meaning. That is the Golgotha the earliest sources actually describe, not the sublime and stormy peak of the imagination, but a skull-shaped hump of quarry stone by a roadside garden, close enough to the city that the sign above a dying man could be read by anyone who passed. What remains? For the writers of the Gospels, this location was not incidental. That it happened outside the gate, in the open and the ordinary, carried a weight they wanted their readers to feel. For Christians across every tradition, Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant alike, the argument over the exact stone has never once shaken the conviction about what they believe took place upon it. The disagreement is about a location. The faith was never anchored to a set of coordinates, and even for someone who stands entirely outside that faith, there is something arresting in the honest reckoning. We can walk into a genuine first-century quarry garden in the heart of Jerusalem, run our hands over tombs cut in the age of Augustus, hold in our minds a bent Roman nail in a young man's heel, and know, with the quiet certainty of evidence, that the world was exactly like this. The place of the skull was real. It was a real edge of a real city, and something happened there that the world has never stopped arguing about. The exact spot may stay just beyond our reach, but the world around it has never been closer. In the next chapter, we will step through the gate, the sources call the Garden Gate, and follow the road that ran past the place of the skull, into the city as it stood in that final week, to ask a different question. Not where these things happened, but why they happened when they did.